So good afternoon to all members of our Universal Philosophical Community, the White Tower. Today, we're very pleased to have Professor De Miranda with us. Professor De Miranda, on behalf of our philosophical community, would like to express our warmest welcome.
Yasas.
Thank you for accepting our invitation in the first place.
Well, it's a pleasure. I'm always happy to discuss my ideas and the importance of philosophical health in our society. And for me, it's very significant that I have this interview now with you, who are located in Greece.
That's correct.
I have family in Greece. I was in Greece this summer in ancient Stagira, where Aristotle was born and presumably also buried. And so, of course, for a philosopher, it's always there is always a sense of tribute that one needs to pay for to the Western invention of philosophy in Greece. So, thank you.
Yes, indeed, you're right. Professor, you are a philosophical practitioner, and you're also doing consulting sessions in Sweden, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm a philosophical counselor, so I help people in dialogue one-on-one to make sense of their life and get a little bit more aware of what the real motivations of their actions are, such that they live a better life.
Very nice. Would you like to tell us a few more things about yourself and your academic career?
Sure. So I'm a senior researcher in Scandinavia, both affiliated with the Institute for Advanced Student Studies at the University of Turku and the Center for Wellbeing, Welfare and Happiness at the Stockholm School of Economics. And I actually joined academia quite late in life. Before that, I was writing novels. I was author of essays living in France. And so today I'm very much focused both on the practice and theory of philosophical health, which is a field that is emerging, but at the same time, one could almost say booming, because I think we live in a time where people are, not everybody, of course, but quite a few people are understanding that in order to make sense of this global world, which seems so absurd, so contradictory, so violent in some cases, we need to start discussing together about the shared purpose of our presence on Earth. And this is something that philosophy is very helpful with.
And also you've written a lot of books and essays that develop a specific interest for societal issues, historical methods, technological devices, and also cosmological concepts of continuous creation via process philosophy, namely Heraclitus, Hegel. And your main concept is that of crealectics.
Indeed. So I don't know how much time we have to enter into that, but let's put it like this. I don't know how much you know of the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel.
Yes, and
so it's a very famous.
Yeah, we're very pleased to watch your post today on LinkedIn,
right?
Where you
Yeah, I try to explain the difference between analytic intelligence, dialectic intelligence, and crealectic intelligence, using that fairy tale. So I'm not going to retell the fairy tale, but we all know that the first strategy to avoid getting lost in the forest is to drop these pebbles, these little stones.
Right.
And this, for me, is the symbol of analytic intelligence, right? We
Yeah.
divide the world into little bits. And of course, it's very useful, but at the same time, analytic intelligence tends to be not very creative. It's like we use what we confront the unknown with what we know, and we try to map the known into the unknown. And the result of that is that, yes, the pebbles allow us to go to find our way, but we go back to a situation that was quite problematic, right?
Yeah.
The parents, the bad parents.
Back
But
where we
then there is
started from.
yes, exactly. Then there is dialectic intelligence, and philosophy has had a lot to do with this form of intelligence from Plato, for which dialectics was more this form of dialogue through diplomatic disagreement, and all the way through Hegel, where for him he sees dialectics as the very process of reality, where opposites confront each other, and the synthesis needs to emerge from the opposition of this contrary. And this is also very useful, for example, in human relations, right? Because humans spend a lot of time disagreeing or trying to make sense of things. But there's a third, and that's, so to illustrate this, it's when Hansel and Gretel, they don't have stones anymore, but they have bread. And so they put crumbs of bread, right?
Yeah.
And so what is dialectic there is that for them, the bread means signs that allow them to see a path. But for the birds, bread is food. So there is a conflict of interpretations there, and which is a dialectic conflict. And the problem is if one dominates, which is the birds in this case, they eat the bread, so their interpretation of the signs wins, and then Hansel and Gretel get lost, right?
Very, very well said. So there is room for improvisation on behalf of the guys.
Right. And what they do well, they are then confronted into the choice between despair or exploration. And this is where crealectic intelligence enters into play.
Yeah.
So they face the unknown. So crealectic comes from the word creal, which means creative real. So it means that reality that many people tend to see as something fixed, as sort of a set of routines that constantly come back. Reality is a creative process, always in flow, always dynamic. Where we take for granted today will not be the case tomorrow. So we cannot base our actions on what we know is the case, because there is always uncertainty, novelties. And so crealectic intelligence embraces that, the creative nature of reality, and and confronts the possibility, of course, of danger, but also the possibility of being able to overcome the obstacles through new forms of thinking, and this is what crealectic intelligence is about.
Yeah, so you're basically saying that success involves all these three types of intelligences.
I agree. Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Very well. And so starting with the prologue of your book, you state philosopher René Descartes, the philosopher of the 17th century, who clearly states that human beings have basically one viewpoint of seeing seeing reality as it is. But according to Descartes, there could be different perspectives and different worldviews possible. Do you believe that Descartes' position is a start point where we should all focus when examining philosophical health?
I do think Descartes was the first philosophical counselor in modernity. He spent a lot of time advising usually queens and kings and people who asked him about various matters, like the nature of emotions. He ended his life in Sweden by advising Queen Christina on a daily basis on various philosophical matters. So I think you use the term worldview, and it's important for our audience to understand that it would have been an anachronism to speak of worldviews. Descartes doesn't speak of worldview, but he does insist on the fact that each of us has a cogito, which is a capacity to think for oneself, right? Cogito means I think in Latin. And so this capacity that we have allows us to be responsible and aware of the form of life that we represent, because by our biography, we are unique, right? There is not one human that has the exact same path on Earth. So this is what Descartes means, is that this is the absolute truth of philosophy, is everybody being able to say, I think, therefore I am. And even if I doubt that I think, this doubt itself is myself thinking. So, it's interesting because we've had the 20th century, which was the dominance of psychoanalysis in terms of understanding who we are, right? And psychoanalysis was built on the idea of the libido, I desire. So today, I think we have a new science emerging. I don't know, maybe it will be called cogitopathology, but
maybe.
it's about understanding that we have perhaps too much devaluated our capacity for autonomous thinking. Of course, we're never fully autonomous, right? But this devaluation is not only a personal matter. We're not going to only blame individuals for not taking care of their cogito, which we should, because a lot of people don't. But we should also blame governance. We should also blame corporations. There is a sort of I'm not going to say conspiracy, right? But there's a systematic work to prevent people from access conceptual thinking, autonomous thinking. I don't know, for example, you will tell me in Greece, when do young people start to study philosophy? In France, when I was studying, it was the last year of gymnasium. So it was like 16, 17 years old.
What I'm going to answer is that if we ever start discussing the question, who is to blame, I'm afraid we won't finish. We won't ever finish this discussion because it's an endless topic. But let's take a turn inward, I would say, if you agree with me, and discuss about what philosophers have to say. I'm going to mention this topic of philosophy later on, because I have one question I'd like you to answer. So Leibniz talks about the best of all possible worlds, and he compares the individual realm with the whole world by saying that the realm of possibility of each individual is maximized to the extent that the composability of the whole world is also maximized. And he pays attention more. He does give care. He cares more about the whole rather than the sum of the parts. I'd like to ask you, how feasible is this dynamic of interplay between these forces? what do you need to put flesh on the bones of this conglomeration of these dynamic forces being joined together?
Right. So I spent quite a bit of time in the book explaining the difference between possibility and compossibility, right? And
I would like to mention here that I've read the whole book of yours, and I mean it's a masterpiece. Everybody should delve into it, and it's the least I can say about it.
mm-hmm. No, thanks a lot for saying that.
You clearly state the whole the whole idea of crealectics by mentioning analytical examples of almost everything.
Mm-hmm. And so to answer your question, the idea, and also to sort of clarify for people who are listening who might say, what are they talking about, right?
Yeah.
So we all familiar with the idea of possibility, right? But compossibility is this word created by Leibniz, which means things that are possible together in the same world. So to create a world, you need possibles, things that can exist, but you also need these things to be compatible. That's what compossible means. So it seems like a simple idea.
That's the most difficult part.
Right. And then, exactly. And of course, if you see possible, I'm taking your metaphor here. If you see possible as bones, then perhaps the compossible in that case would be the organism, right? The body. And so it always been a mystery for even today for biologists. They cannot explain the fact of life. They can explain how parts function, but they cannot explain the whole. And sometimes they don't want to explain it. So the most difficult human endeavor is not to access new possibilities. That's a form of creativity, and that's important. And in one sense, the last 300 years have been the triumph of possibility, right? We create things that seem amazing. But what we are still not very good at, and what has precipitated our world into the crisis that it is today, is that we're not very good at possibility thinking. It's like when we have a new possibility, before we put it into reality, we need to think, is this going to be compossible with the rest of existing reality?
So
and how do we?
Yeah. So you're mostly referring to the realm of the real, as you state. As everything possibilizes before becoming real in its final state.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's the potential aspect of things, right? So in a way, other people, very smart people have said that before me. Aristotle already had a view of the world divided into potential and actualization. And so you can see the universe, and this is very compatible with quantum physics. The universe is a set of infinite possibility that are not actualized. All of them are not actualized. It's potentials, right? And to be actualized, it's becoming real. Now, what I am observing is that the universe is not only a set of possible, it has also a composibilizing drive. Otherwise, we could not explain order. We could not explain organisms, for example. We could not explain emerging order. So there must be, and this is in a way what biologists are saying, what physicists are saying, what we can observe around us. Like there must be some compossibilizing drive, not just possibilizing drives, right? So there is a tendency towards order, even though, of course, and I'm not going to enter into the details, but the second law of thermodynamics claims that ultimately everything will go into this entropy of chaos. But this is not what we observe when we look even at the universe. We see that the universe is expanding. So my postulate hypothesis is that at the core of the universe, there's this krill force that is not only creating possibilities, but also trying to harmonize them. And if this is the case, of course, it's partly a speculation, but philosophers like to speculate. But if this is the case, then at the level of the microcosm, you, me, it's the same tendency. We have possibles. We have this tendency to recreate ourselves, but we also have a love for some form of structure, order, and in some cases, these two tendencies they are somewhat in tension. Yeah, if not contradictory, in some tension. That's exactly what I call crealectis. This
Very
tension
nice.
between the multiple in us and the one. Which, by the way, let me say that if we look at the Greek philosophers, the ancient Greek philosophers, a lot of them were discussing the multiple and the one. And when people look at this today, they say, but why were they so obsessed by the multiple and the one? Well, precisely because this is the engine of the universe, the multiplicity of creation, and the unity of wholes. Because we observe that wholes emerge. Life is, for example, one of them.
Very well said. Even though they're difficult notions for everyone to understand, but everyone can reach its meaning. Now, contra Plato, you think that this this creative process of realization cannot be done once and for all, as if it is an ever-changing and evolving process that takes some time until it is refined.
Right. Things are not determined once and for all as eternal ideas. Interesting that you mentioned that some of the ideas that I put out here are complex, right? And actually, I follow a inverted logic. If we compare myself to other people, like people usually they write difficult books and then they speak of the books in a simple way. Perhaps I do the opposite because I believe that my book, the one that you just mentioned, Philosophical Health, is quite pedagogic, is quite relatively simple to understand. But here we are together, we're having a philosophical conversation, so perhaps we can dare a few more poetic complexities. So I do agree that the world is not following a deterministic algorithm of unfolding. That's why I think the cosmos is ultimately created. So I side more with process philosopher. For example, since we're talking about Plato, Heraclitus.
Yeah. Right. Now, starting from the first chapter of your book called The Sense of Body, or the Bodily Sense, I'd like to ask you an introductory question. What does it take to embody this principle of bodily sense, incorporate it so as to become wiser? And what exactly means to become a wise person, contrary to wise guys that claim to know everything and express opinionated statements?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And we humans are very good at that, right? At being
Unfortunately.
opinionated. Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So there are 6 senses in my approach, right? You mentioned one of them,
The first
bodily
one.
sense.
Yeah.
Then there is the sense of self,
Mhm.
then the sense of belonging, then the sense of the possible, and then the sense of purpose, and ultimately the philosophical sense. And we're going to mention all of that. So it's an equilibrium. So even
Yeah.
if we master our bodily sense, like if we have a good relationship with our body, a philosophical relationship with our body, it won't make us wise because we still need to take care of the other senses, right?
Exactly.
But of course, if we're talking about the body, if your question is about the bodily sense, well, for example, Spinoza considered that there's only one emotion, which is joy. So for him, a good bodily sense is actually to feel regularly joyful, to consider, to experience your body as a source of joy. And what does that mean for
The joie de
Spinoza?
vivre, as it is said
Exactly,
in French.
exactly. Joie de vivre, that's
Joie de
exactly that.
vivre.
And so for
Yeah.
Spinoza is joy is the emotion that goes together with the sense that we are expanding our domain of possibility. So it has to do with agency, the capacity to transform the world according to our view. So it's an active property, it's not passive. It has nothing to do with what today some people call fun, for example, right?
Yeah.
It's not consumption. That's just one example. We could talk about how we interpret our body's signals, right? We speak popularly of, do I listen to my body? We could talk simply about moving with fluidity around the world, right? So this is just one aspect. And more importantly, and this I think something that I should stand is that contrary to physical health or psychological health, I believe that philosophical health should not be normative. Like it should not tell
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
how to be
It's
healthy,
not
right?
supposed to act like that. Yeah.
Right. So if you were in a session with me or philosophical counseling, we would go through these six senses, but I would mostly listen to you. So tell me about your relationship with your body, and we will go through your own singularity, your own biography, your own journey. And from then, we will slowly make sense through these different aspects, the self, the belonging, etc., all the way to your worldview and your purpose. Because I believe that this then would help you have a wiser life, to answer your question, right? About wisdom. So, wisdom as a result of a constant work on our reasons to act,
Yeah.
our
Right.
purpose, and our understanding of why the world is how it is.
That's it. And eventually, this hypothetical conversation, counseling, would lead us would lead to a greater emotional awareness and resilience once you start listening to your body, let's say. And I'd like to ask, does emotional intelligence interfere into this process of
So
could it be the case?
one thing is emotions and one thing is emotional intelligence, right? So if you put the word intelligence, you're already supposing that we are processing emotions in a given way, right?
Right.
Intelligere, to collect. So I believe that emotions that are not processed can distort. Emotions are distortions, right? That's why when you are, for example, under the effect of a strong emotion, you're not going to say exactly what you want to say, or you're not going to do exactly what you want to do. However, I also believe that healthy thinking should not be abstract. We should not be detached from our body and our feeling. There is a sense by which actually we can and we should feel ourselves thinking. You know, we talk about proprioception, is how you feel your body. Like if I close my eyes, I can still touch my ear. That's proprioception. I move in space and time, and my body feels itself. In the same way, I speak. That's not in the book because that's a new concept, but I'm working on constantly. I like to create terms, right? The proprioconception. So the thinking, feeling itself, thinking in space time. And so real philosophers, are very often feeling their thoughts. They do not separate the emotional intelligence from the more conceptual intelligence. All this is connected. That's why the bodily sense is important in philosophical health.
Right, everything is interconnected.
Very simple translation of these senses.
Mm-hmm.
We could say that bodily sense is am. There's no I yet. Is am. You are in the world. Something that you feel is saying am. That's being. The being and becoming precede the I. It's not that they go after, they precede the I. And then the sense of self is I am. And then the sense of belonging is we are. And so this is interesting because historically, because we have become such individualistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
We see ourselves as an I before we see ourselves as a we. But we know of other cultures, either geographically or in time, where the we are preceded the I am. But let's say that today in our world is more and more the I am. And then the sense of the possible is I can. And then the sense of purpose is I want, but an elevated I want, right? Not I want in the sense of consumption. And then the philosophical sense is I understand. So if we wanted to say this with very simple verbs, is am, I am, we are, I can, I want, I understand. And those are fundamental qualities of our existence and our presence in the world.
Right. Now, we all know about Aristotle's golden mean between the excesses on the one hand and the deficiencies on the other. The Greek word of this golden mean is sophrosine, that is temperance, moderation, humility, self-control that somebody must have during his lifetime to overcome all the obstacles that might get in his way. What does it take and how difficult is it for someone to actually implement this principle in his life, this principle of golden mean?
Right. It's a very good question. So usually, if you try to address it directly, like for example, people who say, I'm going to be humble now, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So how do we really become humble? And perhaps we never really become fully humble, and perhaps we shouldn't be too humble either, right? But in my view, is through the sense of purpose and the higher purpose. Because what happens with the higher purpose is that we are slowly becoming a concept, and there is a transcendence of the self. The self-transcendence is like our self dissolves and lets this grander ideal take over. And therefore, it's not really humility in that case, right? Because we can appear very ambitious, but we're not serving our ego. We're serving a cause that
Our
we
superego,
believe.
maybe, our superego, like.
Well,
could be.
if we take the Freudian reading, right? But I think that Freud had the distinction between the superego and the ideal of the self, which has two different things. So I would rather say, well, the higher purpose would be more the ideal of the self, right?
Right.
Could be justice for all, philosophical health for all. While actually what we call the self in philosophy is probably the superego, because we're talking about a self that is already trying to be civilized, right? So like the superego, but that's just at the level of the self. So this is how Aristotle's believed that we could achieve some form of excellence. However, this idea of the golden mean also introduces an idea of moderation for him, right? The idea that we should integrate self-criticism such that we do not become inebriated by our own dogmatism, right? So we all have, especially people who have a higher purpose, they can become quite dogmatic, right? So here, a sort of a temperance would be, okay, I have a form of life. Other forms of life should be possible. And this is actually something that I do in my counseling, is that when someone comes to me for the first time in the first session, I always consider I'm welcoming a possible new form of life, whether that form of life is self-aware or whether it's just a set of potentials.
Exactly. Now that we've mentioned the sense of the self, we're coming to the second chapter of your book, talking about singularity and transformational potential. Is singularity achieved by birth, or is it actually an effect of our own experiences? In other words, is it nature or nurture mostly?
Right. It's a very good question.
Yeah.
So I would say, of course, both,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a different kind of singularity, right? So
Yeah.
by birth, we have the singularity of the creel, which means that we are infinite
Yeah.
potential.
Right.
And by biography, we have the singularity of experience and destiny, which is the slow patterns that are more or less aware that we create. So very often today, self-development is too focused on the future, which is important. Of course, we shouldn't be too focused on the past. But should we, perhaps the golden mean is where we are now between the past and the future. And so in order to become philosophically healthy, we should also do this 180 degrees turn, look at our past, and as you were saying, look therefore at singularity in a case of necessity, like we have taken decisions that make patterns and that define who we are and that we cannot negate, that we should embrace. So, but look at this. When we're born, we have, let's say there's this point of creative singularity, of potential. And this point keeps moving. And you now and me, we are at this point, we might, whatever the age we are, from the point of view of the present, we are still infinite potential. This doesn't mean, of course, that we can start flying, etc., right? But we, in terms of potential, we can embrace much more than we usually think when we follow realistic routines or ideologies.
Of course, nowadays we observe that individuals are no longer willing to transform themselves into a better version. What shall they do? What shall they relinquish in terms of personal pursuits, let's say? And what sacrifices they have to make to yield to the collective cause? Of course, it's okay to sacrifice, but also sometimes it's not okay to submit to some outdated societal rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the etymology of sacrifice is actually Latin, as you know. It means to make something sacred. That's the origin of sacrifice. So if your sacrifice is not contributing to a certain sense of the sacred, whether it's a higher purpose, then you shouldn't sacrifice. You just basically submitting to a higher power, right?
Yeah.
So now you did mention that people are not willing to enhance themselves, right? I do think that there is a drive for enrichment in every living being, but it is not always well understood. So, for example, if you take the United States today, it's the triumph of financial enrichment. So they want us to believe, it's not new, right? But it's becoming worse. They want us to believe that by financial enrichment, we achieve well-being. We know it's not the case. So I think that there is an instinct of enrichment, but it is perverted by other ideas that are imposed on us. So what philosophical health says that it's okay to want to become rich, but richness is so much more than financial security, for example.
Yeah, and being rich doesn't mean that you are happy. So moving from the realm of possibility to that of compossibility, and talking about this the sense of the self, what does it actually mean to process the world as people try to make their own way to navigate this turbulent world? How easy is it for someone to keep his own principles intact as he's trying to navigate and fight?
Well, of course, it's not easy, right? And I do think that this cannot be achieved only by trying to have a strong self. The self itself is not powerful enough to resist the immense powers of corruption or powers of routine or ideologies or simply, what other people say should be reality. So this is where, again, there is an importance of being anchored to a higher purpose, but also, as the sense of belonging announces, also to try to be part of a community of practice and a community of intellect that allows us to resist better, not as single person, the myth of the hero, but as a group. But this has been philosophy's ideal at the beginning, right? This sort of autonomy of not being influenced by forces of corruption. And so I believe that this is what philosophical health ultimately is. It's a constant training and exercise and attention to reach that autonomy such that we are often together in at least small groups capable of resisting the forces of oppression.
Right.
But it's not easy, to be honest. Of course,
yeah.
and you know that.
Yeah. So it matches with the saying that goes like, it's better to prevent a situation rather than treat it. So it could be used as a preventive measure as well, the philosophical health, by having a higher purpose in mind.
That's a very good point. That's exactly that. Is that we are not focused. It's not engineering. Like, we're not focused on extinguishing fires or repairing things that go broken. Sometimes that is needed, but more importantly, what philosophical health does, it just prepares us. Plato said, philosophy prepares us to die. I would like to be less dramatic and say, philosophy prepares us for for paradise on earth, which might come tomorrow, which might never come, but which can get a little bit closer. So there is a resilience that is created by this attitude, which over time allows us to be less vulnerable, and also to be able to create spaces of, I'm going to say sacred spaces, but by that, of course, I don't mean churches, I mean spaces of meaning, spaces where the sense of the sublime and the sense of, a beauty of poetry, of care, of elevation. This is cultivated and as a shield protecting us from corruption.
Well said. And we should always remember that we all possess two main skills, that of plasticity and elasticity. That is, besides the skill of change, beside the skill of being able to change and adapt to the world, that of plasticity, we can always return to our core values, that of elasticity. So why not try and stick to our own principles and see how it goes?
Right. I delve a bit into this principles in the book. We can imagine that an elastic breaks, right? Some individuals break, at least for a while, let's say. But I think our capacity for plasticity, which for our audience that might not know is the capacity for the mind to reinvent itself and not rigidify itself in the same modes of functioning. This is something that is part of our pre-electric nature, indeed. So I think that perhaps people are wondering. At least this is very often what people ask me is that how practical is this, right? Because philosophy has been associated for many centuries with unpracticality, right? We all know of the story of Thales, who was considered incapable and who was thinking and fell into a well, etc. So this is where it's very important to mention that, in my view, and in the philosophical health paradigm, this is about aligning our thoughts and theories and worldviews with our actions in order to be more efficient in the actions. Because let's face it, people who are reputed to be very practical are very often a mess of contradictory gestures, right? While what the sense of purpose does, what the clarity of purpose and mind and worldview does, is that we are capable of actually having better results with less effort, because we know what is important for us and we know what should actually be either ignored or not complicated. This is what I call pruning your life, right? We all know. I'm actually not a gardener, but I do know that gardeners, in order to maintain their garden and the trees, etc., they need sometimes to cut some branches for the general thriving of the tree.
Like navigating the world with art and dexterity, something like that, carefully.
Yes, but also knowing that there are some things. It's a little bit like live and let die, if you want. I don't know. It's a James Bond's reference, right? But it's this idea that not everything should be brought into existence. Some potentials should remain potential. But we are in a world of hubris, so people want everything in front of them, like an existential buffet, all you can eat.
So if we are to move from the state of the self, the state of well-being, to that of well-belonging, let's refer to the ideology of this open society, where there's free trade and consumerism, Everywhere, individuals are bombarded with messages from social media, left, right, and center, and they express highly opinionated statements. And I'd like to ask, are their opinions their real opinions, after all?
Well, of course, philosophy is starting as a critique of opinions, right? With Socrates and the idea that people are stubborn, but their claims are not based on real knowledge. So there is something called the art of conversation, which is the fact that we can have a very good dialectic exchange, and we know that some claims are, of course, not so serious because we have this sort of epistemic humility. But what you're referring to is this world of social media where suddenly democracy has created this cacophony of egos.
Exactly.
An ego trip. And I wrote a book called Ego Trip about that even before the social media. And of course, then that's the direct result of democracy, is that everyone wants to be considered important. And if you criticize that, then you might appear as being a sort of a conservative, reactionary, because basically there are also a lot of these opinions that you claim that are actually now today reactionary, right? And so that doesn't make them more valid because they are reactionary. So in general, this is why I ended up late in life in joining academia, is that I like the ideal of a epistemic society, a society where we take care of what we think, what we claim, and rather than disguising personal interests behind pseudo theories. Of course, academia is not at all perfect today, but I like this the sense that democracy. I don't want to criticize democracy, but I believe that it's a very young project. We are just in the very beginning of democracy, and we are a little bit in the moment of the baby, 3 years old. They are lovely, but at the same time, there's this very strong ego that starts appearing, right?
Exactly.
And so this is a little bit where we are. So we still have many beautiful years of growth in front of us to achieve a real democracy.
And since you are talking about democracy, there's a part in your book where Hannah Arendt is mentioned. The philosopher Hannah Arendt focuses on ancient Greece and the notion of idiocy and people as idiots. These are people that abstain from politics and participation in the political arena.
Right.
They don't participate in debates and conversation in an open market the way ancient Greeks used to do in the past. But instead, they focus on household chores and actually, they're pretty much excluded from public affairs. Now, how can we possibly reverse this whole situation? Can this be made at least in the long term, for instance, by implementing some notions of direct democratic principles, maybe?
So it's interesting that you asked that very immense question. And I have to say, I have more or less 5 minutes left before I need to take a boat. as I am to cross the sea between Finland and Sweden. So
Wow.
you do mention Anna Arendt. She wrote a beautiful book called The Human Condition. Well, to summarize, I would say that I do believe that a higher purpose is something that we believe brings us closer to paradise on earth. And I do believe that the higher purpose of philosophical health can slowly, asymptotically contribute to the project that you are you're mentioning, people who are not just in their own bubble. It is the definition of the origin, the etymology of idiot, right? On their own, but they are living compossibly with not only other human beings, but also other beings. Will this happen in the next 5 years? No. Will this happen in the next 50 years? Probably not. But I believe it will happen. That's what keeps me in the passion of trying to help people one by one, one person at a time, right? To achieve this state that we call philosophical health.
So, a final question, if I may. Is it high time we all, teachers and professors alike, we all started teaching these philosophical trends at school, in primary, secondary, and tertiary levels? And why is not philosophy taught at schools in a proper way nowadays?
Well, there's not a lot of political will to have young children and even teenagers philosophize. Then that's a fact. So obviously, it's probably more convenient for the powers in place to have people that are less critical and consuming rather than capable of the forms of thinking that we've been talking about for 1 hour. So, but there are exceptions. I'll finish with a beautiful story. I am working once in a while in dialogue with a school here in Sweden called Φιλοσοφική. And what they do is that from the age 4, every children has, and they do this in classrooms. Every classroom has 1 hour of philosophizing per week. I think it's a beautiful project. It's encouraging, and of course, it's too isolated. But perhaps a great change would happen in the world if every school offered this 1 hour of philosophizing from the youngest year, because we can do philosophy in a very simple way with children. So let's continue the fight. Let's continue the gracious efforts to help people become a little bit more aware, engage in life, and with the feeling that they can make this world a better, compossible place.
A better place, yes. Let's heal the world. Let's make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. These were and are the verses of Michael Jackson's song.
Indeed.
And that is still a hit today. So, my dear friends, members of the philosophical community, today we'd like to thank Professor de Miranda for having an exclusive conversation with us. we had the opportunity to talk about elements of philosophical health, the bodily sense, the sense of the self, the sense of belonging, sense of the possible, sense of purpose, and the philosophical sense. Professor de Miranda, thanks again for accepting our invitation. You gave us the opportunity to analyze all of these philosophical elements, and we hope to have a similar conversation about another book of yours in the near future.
It would be my pleasure. Thanks a lot, and good luck. And I will be certainly going back to Greece on the footsteps of Aristotle, and to sort of remember one thing that he insisted on is that each of us has the capacity and the responsibility to have a life that is as grand as possible, and this can be done with humility. But also, it cannot be always, you talked about blame. We cannot always blame our past, blame the others, blame our regimes to start the work of being philosophically healthy now. We can start now, individually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Start now. There's no tomorrow. Thanks again, Professor de Miranda, and his book, Philosophical Health. Thank you very much for attending this online session.
Thank you.
Keep in touch.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, you too.